The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 28 of Wealth Talk. My name's Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and I'm joined once again by Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hi, Kevin.
Good morning, Chris. Nice to talk to you again. And aren't we having some fun? Wasn't that a great episode last week with Simon Zucchi dispensing his wisdom?
It was really enjoyable. Yeah, we've had some great feedback in the Facebook community from our members, and it was very kind of Simon as well to offer that free entry to a PIN event for anyone listening. So if you didn't catch last week's episode, definitely do go back and check that one out. So Kevin, we're continuing with the property pillar this week, and we're diving in now. We're starting to look at some of the different strategies that sit within or sit under that property pillar. And today we're going to be focusing on HMOs. People may have a couple of different ways of describing HMOs, but Kevin, would you like to kind of give your version of really what an HMO is?
Sure. Well, whatever label you use, whether it's, home for multiple occupancy or home for multiple occupation, you say potato, I say potato. There's no legal definition here. What we're really saying is the fundamental difference between taking a piece of property and creating value from it through the renting of rooms and space in the property, compared to renting the whole property out to a family on an assured short-hold tenancy agreement. So it's just a way of creating higher levels of cash flow. For many people, it's an accelerated way of being able to build their wealth, because the evidence is when the HMO portfolio building process works compared to the tradition of the buy-to-let portfolio, it helps people create wealth so much more quickly, so much more systematically, and easier to run as a business, because you can make it really quite formulaic. Not that everything is a cookie cutter, but you can create a model that is very specific to your tenant type, very specific to what experience you want to bring, and more of that from our contributors. So it's a really, really interesting way. And I would say that probably in property, while it's got some challenges right now, and some of our speakers will talk about the challenges coming and that are already here with government intervention and HMOs, I think what we are still seeing, though, is, and I can at least count possibly 150 of my clients who are completely financially independent through the use primarily of the HMO strategy. So it's definitely one to really, really wrestle with and dive deep into and try and iron out any misconceptions or misunderstandings, because there's lots of those around. And why don't we start with that, some of those thoughts now?
Yeah, and just to touch on, Kevin, HMOs are nothing new, and some people might refer to them as multi-lets. And would you say that it's become even more popular with recent years, just the shortage of property space that exists in the UK, and having to multi-purpose, some of the bigger properties that are out there just to fit more people in? And that's perhaps a problem that's only going to get worse, or the opportunity grow bigger, shall we say?
Yeah, I think even Simon was talking last week, the big demographics are, we need more space. And, it's not unusual now with in places in Europe where there's a high propensity of people to rent. And there are definitely communities within the UK, rental types, where their natural place in their lifetime is they only want property for a shortish period of time. So to bring to life, to enliven properties which perhaps, would be wasted in terms of space, 5-bedroom houses with 3 people in it and so on. There's a big opportunity. Now, the opportunity, of course, has been spotted by many, and councils have an issue with, something called Article 4, and there's definitely limitations, and the government intervention has made limitations, which is why some people have moved to different strategies, which we'll cover on different episodes, like service accommodation. But there's still always going to be a demand for people, particularly Let's take some of the key tenant types. Do you want me to describe those, Chris?
Please do.
All right. Well, the most popular one, and the one that people will obviously resonate with, if they're like me, and I'm an old guy now, but I still went to university, and for the most part, I occupied properties that were owned by somebody else, and I wouldn't say they were the best accommodation, but they accommodated lots of young people who will put up with that. And of course, by maximizing the use of that space, then there was a high level of cash flow. So, that's a real big win as far as the student market is concerned. So students are a key market in the multi-let space. And of course, like any tenant type, you've got to wrestle with the pros and the cons. So the big pro with students is, they're relatively easy to identify. You know where the university and college towns are. Some people actually specialize in colleges and small colleges, so they don't end up competing with universities, and more of that in the risks, I suppose, in this pros and cons discussion. You've also got the issue of increasingly mums and dads are guaranteeing the rent. So if the students don't pay, mums and dads do, and that's a good thing. And because they tend to occupy the property from point A to point B, you don't really get any voids. So there's good positive cash flow, good security, good wins. But some negatives that go along with that, as always. One of those is, it's not unusual, is it, to hear that they need more maintenance. People don't tend to look after things as well. There's some much evidence about that. If you want to get into the market and you're looking for student accommodation, but something goes wrong on a purchase, which I've seen happen before, unfortunately, where people buy a property with the expectation of getting it ready for that term time, that readiness for when the students are signing up, and they miss that. And if you miss that and you're gearing up specifically for student market, you could completely devastate your cash flow. So you really got to be on the ball and know what you're doing. But that's a rich market that I think many people are going for. The other markets, Chris, would be professional people. I suppose the students who graduate and then they move on. They're not ready yet. They're not ready to settle down and build a family and build homes and things for themselves. But they're certainly looking for higher quality accommodation. And some of our clients are specializing in this. One in particular is, specializing in providing accommodation for young doctors, because from his experience, and he's a doctor himself, hated the quality of the accommodation, and his view is the brightest minds and those people making great contributions to society get the worst accommodation. Why is that? And he's trying to create a business that changes that and provides really high quality accommodation, but aims specifically at young doctors. And because he's a doctor himself, he's using the leverage of his own relationships and his own intellect to maximize that. So that's another point. You have to look at what's most natural and logical for you to be looking at if you're thinking about HMOs. And for our doctor client there, that's a perfect fit. For others, and we'll hear from Andy, who will be speaking later about the young professionals, which is a transient market, but they expect higher things. They're being paid, they're getting well paid, and they want somewhere to live, but a sense of belonging, a sense of almost like a home away from home. They want to feel on their own. So it's almost, I think he refers to them as housemates, so there's a whole language of how to do that. And that's the young professional market. And, you need to tie into, well, where are the big employers that would serve your tenant type? Equally, there are blue collar workers, so a large number of our clients have got properties where they aim specifically towards factory type workers or other type workers where, they're living in that sort of accommodation. And again, it's just slightly different market, slightly different locations, slightly different features and benefits that are needed and looked for by these people. But, these are all the key ones. And then you get really specialist and really niche. And of course, wealth building is all about looking for your niche if you can find one. And you'll also hear from one of our clients, Kevin, who his niche is, very, very specific, and that's what he would call supported living. which you could also refer to as those people who've got certain special needs in life, whether it's adults needing certain things or children who need protecting. There's very specific collaborations between landlords and housing associations or councils and the public sector, and that can work as well. So when you think about HMO, it's a it's a kaleidoscope of opportunity. It isn't one single thing, and it isn't too much of a differential. Then when you look at service accommodation, that's just the same thing. That's almost renting rooms, but instead of renting them long-term rooms, you're renting rooms for much shorter terms typically, and probably not in this podcast, but maybe the next one, Chris, we can interview and bring in some of our clients and members who are doing that. So is that a good overview?
I think so. Yeah. And I liked the fact that you mentioned there, as entrepreneurs, we need to be creative. We need to constantly be looking for the niches, the opportunities, and also your reference there that your portfolio, you should look at that as a business, right? So we talk about the different pillars and we're focusing on property now, but your HMO portfolio is a business in itself, right?
Yes, everything should be regarded as a business. And I think it's probably a good idea that theme of creativity and business might be worthwhile having a listen to our good friend Kevin McDonald, who's a very outside of the box thinker. And while he doesn't talk specifically, Chris, about HMOs in particular, one of the factors for many people thinking about HMOs is they think, well, maybe, this is more expensive because I'm looking for bigger properties. I need more funding. I think Kevin speaks very loudly and proudly of how you can think outside the box and be able to find access even into the HMO market with very little money. It's probably worthwhile listening to that and then diving a little bit more into those people who are doing it with more traditional funding. Would that work?
Yeah, I think so. I think Kevin definitely sets it up before we really go into the different aspects of HMO. So yeah, let's head on over to Kevin McDonald now. Okay, so I'm with WealthBuilders client Kevin McDonald. How are you, Kevin?
Hi, all good, thank you.
Now, Kevin, I know you've written a book on no money down, and we've been talking to other members of the WealthBuilders community about specific strategies, but would you mind just sharing a bit more about the strategy of no money down?
Yeah, so no money down for me, it's not actually a strategy. It's more about how you deliver the strategy, because I've been in property for 17-ish years now, and one of the biggest challenges I always had was I don't have the money. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and most people know what they want to do. And that, what I mean by that is the strategy. So single let, HMO, commercial conversion, buy to flip, whatever it may be. But the common problem that everybody has is knowing what they want to do, but not having the money to implement what they want to do. And no money down is, for me, is not a strategy, but it's how you deliver the strategy. Because even if you've got no money, and people might be listening to this thinking, I don't have any money to get started in property, but actually people with money, even if you've got £250,000, you don't have enough money to build maybe the 40, 50, 100 property portfolio that you might be aiming to build. What £250,000 generally does is get you started. It might buy you 4 or 5 properties, and you'll end up with 4 or 5 properties and a job. But to build that large scalable business, you need to start thinking more creatively. And no money down is about being able to secure any property deal using little or none of your own funds. Whether that be single lets, HMOs, whatever it may be, it's getting enough properties to create cash flow.
So obviously at WealthBuilders, we look at the 7 pillars. Are there any of the other pillars that can help with this concept of no money down?
Every pillar of the WealthBuilders 7 pillars helps around no money down, because it's more about a way of thinking. For instance, you said I'm a WealthBuilders a client. One of the things I did is I was sitting on a pension pot from my job, and I thought I had no money. I didn't realize I could release my money, and I've got a SaaS pot now, and I use that to fund some property deals. But also, other people have SaaS pots, so other people's money. You could, if you're sitting there listening to this at the moment and thinking, well, I don't have a pension pot, I don't have a SaaS pot, or I don't have a big enough pot. Other people do. There's more money in the world today than there's ever been. So joint venture with other people, use other people's pension pots to build your portfolio. That's one no money down strategy, as I would call it, a one no money down method. But there's many other ways as well. There's loads of different things to do, but all the pillars of the 7 pillars are part of the concept of no money down.
And of course, we also introduced the Wheel of Wealth concept, which always begins with education. So understanding and obviously reading books like yourself and coming to some of the events that you speak at and do training at, Kevin, is the education aspect, is learning what's possible and then having the right connections and support around you to help facilitate that. Why do you see that as so important for someone who maybe is at the beginning and doesn't have the money?
It's critical because you don't know what you don't know. And when I started in property, I thought you had to buy a house, put down a deposit, and then get some rental income from it. And I see so many people. I mentioned about starting with maybe a couple of $100,000 of money. The best thing that ever happened to me was I lost £135,000 in Eastern Europe, and I had not just no money, but I had negative money. So I had to start thinking differently about how I'd build my portfolio, because I was starting with nothing. But people that start with, say, £250,000, what they do is they take their life savings and they put it into property to try and get back out a couple of grand a month. And they spend the rest of their lives getting back what they started with. And the whole point of property isn't to put your life savings in, it's to get money out. So using creative strategies helps you actually make money from property instead of putting your life savings in and having to think that it's about thinking differently and not just thinking one-dimensional, which is I've got to save up a deposit. I mean, if you're thinking of exchanging your time for money in a job, saving up a deposit to buy a house, and then do the exact same thing to save the next deposit and the next deposit, it's just too slow. Your life will be over before you've got 5 houses. The only way to build that big enough business, whether it be in SA, whether it be in HMOs, whether it be in commercial, whatever it may be, single lets, the only way to do it is to think differently, is to think creatively, and to use no money down techniques, to use other people's money, to use other people's property. And a lot of people see no money down as other people's money, as just joint ventures. But actually, it's not joint ventures. It's being creative, or a joint venture and looking at it differently. Because quite often people think a joint venture has to be borrowing money from another investor. But what about just joint venturing with the homeowner of a house? Because quite often the homeowner of the house, the reason they're selling is because they don't have maybe money to do a refurb or something. You could joint venture with the homeowner and refurbish their houses, and the two of you sell it together. So there's loads of creative ways that you can, that's an assisted sale, but there's loads of creative ways that you can think about and do property deals that benefit you and the homeowner. So yeah, there's no money down for me is the only way to do any of the strategies you want to do. So if people are listening and thinking, I know what I want to do, but I'm struggling to actually get started, that's because the thing that's missing is the funding. And the concept of no money down is what helps you fund any property deal.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today, Kevin.
No problem.
Okay, so how would you assess the key points there that Kevin raised?
Well, I think it's obvious that, Kevin is a very clear thinker on being creative and thinking outside the box. And I think he made a really great point, which is one of the benefits of HMO, which is the traditional buy-to-let portfolio. When you work out the cash flow, probably it's an important point, Chris, just to go back to the overall wealth building principles, that whatever strategy you use, you have to work out, let's say you're comparing HMOs to buy-to-let. You'd look at, how many buy-to-let properties on an assured short-hold tenancy property with your assumed occupation rate or void rate, with your assumed return, with your assumed interest rate. So you've got to build in all of these things of your costs to run these any kind of property strategy. And you work out how many. So let's say the average, and I'll just make some numbers up, Chris. If the average buy-to-let yielded you £500 a month net, and you had an objective of reaching, £10,000 per month net as your figure for complete financial independence, then you can work out how many buy-to-let properties you need, because it'd be 20. And if you then flip that and say, well, okay, if I do the numbers and what's the net position on a well-managed, well-structured, well-tenanted, you do the same thing, do the same variables, which means you really have to know the numbers, which is the due diligence stage. When you're accumulating property, you've got to do the due diligence on the cost. And then, of course, you've got to test it in real time afterwards to make sure the assumptions you made were real. And if, let's just say for the sake of an argument, the value of an average HMO was £1,000 a month, then you need half the number. And, that would mean potentially you could do it in half the time, putting aside the issue of funding. And while it's always easy to say that funding is no object, it's clearly funding has to be in place, but there are so many creative ways to achieve funding and joint ventures between people, lending and learning and all sorts of other ways that joint venture funding and funding can be raised. We know this because we raise millions. Then we know that the only lack of resources is the resourcefulness of individuals to think outside the box. So I think Kevin made some great points, that it can be quicker if you leverage other people's money rather than wait to build your own. And similarly, if you leverage higher yielding strategies. But of course, when you think about the strategy, you've got to think about the work. And some people mistakenly believe, and they say, well, I would rather do buy-to-let because it's passive, and I don't want to do HMO because it's active. Well, all wealth needs to be managed, like all property needs to be managed. Otherwise, the property left alone would dilapidate. So there is no such thing as passive income. So let's dispel that myth right now, Chris. It's not passive. It needs to be managed. And the skill is understanding the management that needs to be done to make it work at the highest level, and then work out whether you want to do the management or delegate the management. But either way, you've got the choice and you can deal with it in the way that you want to. So I think Kevin makes some great points there. And maybe as we hear from 3 people who are building their wealth in HMOs and have done very well, might be worth hearing them and debriefing them, Chris.
Yeah, I think so. So let's head on over to our first guest, and that's Andy Bedwell. Okay, so I'm with Andy Bedwell. Welcome to Wealth Talk, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Now, Andy, I know you've been focusing on HMOs, so would you mind sharing with our listeners why you decided on that strategy in particular?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the bulk of my career background's been in corporate, so I was looking for a way of getting out of corporate life. About 8 years ago, probably 8-9 years ago now, we started just looking at ways we could do that, and we were looking at ways that we could build a business that didn't involve us having to be actively involved with it, all day, every day. So basically to get off the clock. And we just started looking at a range of franchising options. Actually, we started working with Platinum Property Partners to start on our HMO journey, and really sort of carried on that journey for 8 years. So it was largely a play out of corporate, and then looking for a way to get the right business model to fit what we wanted to do. Great.
And is there a particular market that you aim for with your tenants?
Yeah, so we try and be at the top end of the market that we're in. So our particular business is sort of based in Oxfordshire, and we're trying to target largely sort of 25 to 35-year-olds, young professionals. Typically in our area, it's people that might work in motorsport or people that work in some of the high-end retail outlets. And yeah, we're trying to provide a sort of all-inclusive, hands-off service for them, so they get really good responsiveness and a very nice house, and we take care of all the paying for them. So it's very much top end of the market, and we try and style the houses and invest the houses to hit that.
Mm. And what are some of the advantages that you see of using the HMO strategy over perhaps typical buy-to-lets or some of the other strategies out there?
We did a lot of work on buy-to-lets originally. We the very first property I bought actually was a buy-to-let, and we ran it back in 2008 as a service department. This was sort of pre-Airbnb and all that sort of that setup. So when we did it, we found it was reasonably high touch and didn't really get great returns. I think when we started to look at the HMO model, and we started to look, again, Platinum were very useful in helping us to set that up. When we started to work through the numbers, it was pretty self-evident actually that it was it was probably the one of the better returns that were available. Albeit it's not without work, and you certainly are running a business with doing them. It's not as straightforward as a single buy-to-let, but for the work you get a better reward.
And I imagine that systems are important with HMOs. As you say, there's a lot more work. So is it really important to have the systems in place early?
I don't know about full all singing, all dancing systems, but we do run an operating system. And with our business partners, actually, they use a slightly different one. But we do have professional letting systems operating. Certainly in the early days, though, we were doing it through spreadsheets initially. I think the main thing that's changed over the 8 years is there's much more now around compliance. Obviously, licensing's ubiquitous now. It wasn't when we started in our area. So there's a lot more you have to do to make sure the houses are safe and legal, and data protection and things like that. So you cover all the bases. So that world is more complex, and it's certainly important to make sure you know the ground before you just dabble into it.
Mm. And is there anything that you do uniquely with your HMOs? Would you say, Andy, to differentiate yourself from the market? I
think we try and be at the top end of the market in the area we're in. We try and build a community. So we have a lettings manager that works for us, and so clients, or our housemates as we call them, have a connection with us and a connection with our lettings manager that's more personal maybe. So we run social nights, we get people together. We proactively will connect somebody in the area who's just moved in with somebody else in one of our houses who might also be looking to meet up with folk. So we try and get to know our people as individuals and make them fit into or help them fit into the community as well as into the house, and that might involve connecting them with other housemates in other houses. Whether that's unique, I don't know. I think it's, from our point of view, we try and do as much as we possibly can do to get the best experience for the housemates. Mm.
And your shared living space, I know, has now led on to a new business for you as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, sure. So we've got 9 HMOs running in the residential side, and about 3 years ago, I started looking then more into commercial property as well. So we've started 2 or 3 years ago a commercial property business that does shared serviced offices and co-working. So that's got 1 co-working site and 2 serviced offices now that are up and running.
Yeah, fantastic. And how do you see the future of the HMO market, Andy?
Certainly it's got tighter legislatively, and the tax environment's changed. I think there'll always be a market for it. I suspect if you look sort of 10 years down the track, some of the things that might happen to high-end HMOs could be similar to what's happened in the student market, where there's some of the bigger players come into town and invest heavily in big buildings. So I think there's definitely there will be new players come in the market doing bigger buildings. I suspect there'll still always be a market for the sort of things that we're doing. I think when you get to the lower end of the market, certainly licensing and things like that will hopefully shake out some of the houses that get bad press. So I think the market overall will change. There'll be stretch in terms of volume with some big players coming in. I think some of the lower end hopefully will clean itself up, and the middle, there'll always be a market for. I think people are, in the short term, people are moving into it to get out of single buy-to-lets because the returns are getting squeezed by the new tax situation. Medium term, whether those people will stay in the market when they work out some of the complexity of running it, I don't know, to be honest. Well, time will have to tell on that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing with us today, Andy. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Okay, so I'm with WealthBuilders member Chris Payton. Welcome to WealthTalk, Chris.
Hi there.
You've been focusing on the property pillar for a number of years now, and more recently HMOs. Why did you decide to focus on HMOs in particular?
Primarily because of the income generation that HMOs can provide. And also the type of product you can deliver as well is something that always interested me. Yeah.
And do you have a particular market, like a tenant, that you look to cater for?
Yeah, so we're professional, solely professional. And we're based in Newcastle. And we have had a student portfolio as well, but haven't pivoted just recently. We've sold all of those student properties off and concentrating solely on professional.
Okay. And what are some of the differences that you see in the way that you operate your HMOs for those different markets?
The product is almost identical. It's the service that you provide is different. I feel that because we self-manage, I feel that the service you provide with professionals is a lot more, I suppose, it's hands-off to a degree, where the service that you provide with students, you are a lot more involved, and because you are effectively helping educate them in the world as well. Sometimes it's the first time they've lived away from home, so it's quite involving at times.
Mm. And in order to kind of stand out from the crowd, shall we say, is there something that you do uniquely with your HMOs, would you say, Chris?
we've always went down the all-en-suite route. So since we entered the market, we've always went down that route. So I think that combined with the aesthetic of the building, it's quite unique. The style that we've developed internally, and the service that we back that product up with as well is quite unique, and I think we're pretty good at that.
Mm. Now, how many years have you been actually active in the HMO market now, Chris?
Well, I bought my first one in 2005 when I was going into university, chose to live on my own as opposed to in a halls, and then I renovated that, completed that in 2007, spent all my student loan on it, and most of my time, because I'm quite hands-on. I come from a construction background, so that helped. Moved back home, much to my parents' annoyance. So 2007 was my first one, but I didn't acquire a further one until 2013.
And would you do something differently now, looking back and the experience that you've had?
Yes. If I could have went back to 2007, I would have been certainly buying a lot more. Just before the recession, anyway. I think with regards to 2013 onwards, I would have been a lot more systemized from the start. I would have grown a team, because it was from day one, it was me and me only. I was the property manager, the builder, and the maintenance contractor. So I would have definitely done that, and I think that would have allowed me to scale faster.
Mm. And how do you see the future of the HMO market now?
So there's obviously a lot more competition within the market in terms of operators. I think you have to be slightly more creative in your product. I think that having a great product isn't necessarily always the most secure way of doing it either. I think in terms of, you've got to make that asset as safe and secure as possible. And I think backing that up with a service as well. I mean, we manage in-house for this reason, but backing up a great product with a great service, I think is vital. And part of that service, I think, is experience-led. I think when you look at the millennials and the Generation Z, I think you need to, part of their life revolves around experience, and I think you need to involve an element of that within your product.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing with us today, Chris.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm with WealthBuilders client Kevin Kinsella. Welcome to WealthTalk, Kevin.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Very, very good today, thank you. So, Kevin, I know you've been working on the property pillar for a number of years, and specifically in a very niche area of HMOs. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about that strategy with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. We actually operate within the supported living section of HMOs, specifically with homeless. Homeless is quite an encompassing label, shall we say, but often people have drug issues and alcohol issues, or are fleeing domestic violence. We've currently got 70 beds, but we're looking to probably double that within a year. What we do is we work with a housing association to gain what's called exempt status. What that actually means is we are exempt from the housing benefit cap. We did try and run these properties within the framework of the council and the housing benefit cap, but you can't really staff the properties, and you can't really, you help the people as much as you can without staff. So we think we found the formula, and we're really pleased to be able to push this thing forward.
Yeah, no, that's really good, Kevin. And what was it initially that made you decide to focus on this market in particular?
It was twofold. Obviously, to help people, and we've got a fantastic reputation with a lot of local authorities, police, and crisis. We are known as a very, very good supplier. But it's great doing good things, but they've got to be repeatable. So we've got the business side of it right as well. We've got currently around about 10 staff. As I said, 70 beds, spread over 4 buildings. We are also looking at getting step-down facilities. So it's twofold, really. It is a business, and I think it has to be a business. Otherwise, you're not really, going to be able to help anybody, and I'd probably end up being one of my own clients. So, that's probably the drive on both things. It is a good feeling, actually being able to be very proud of what you do as well.
And what do you feel are some of the benefits of the HMO strategy over some of the other more traditional, property investing strategiges?
My first HMO I actually accidentally bought in 1995, and it was attached to another business that I was running at the time. So I've kind of been in the market for quite a long time. I found that particular property to be quite difficult to run because it was remote. There was a lot of admin to do, whereas with the tenant group I'm with at the moment, they are an awful lot more challenging. But the fact we're 24/7, have staff on site, issues don't escalate, and we can sort out things very, very quickly. We're not an absentee landlord, which is some of the lower end HMOs I have had in the past, where you're not on site, can be extremely problematic. So yeah, HMOs are a great strategy for cash flow, but you've really, really got to keep on top of them. So I think we've found our niche here. Yeah.
And how do you see the future of the HMO market, Kevin? Do you see this as a growing market?
As I say, certainly that there is a massive, massive shortage of bed spaces at the end of the market I deal with. I'm not au fait with, the top end stuff, which I know a lot of people are doing now with professionals. But the local authority, we turn away probably 20, 30 people a week, and that's just in one borough. We're currently dealing with 5 boroughs and we're putting strategies in place to repeat the model in those boroughs. They're all in the northeast, by the way. So, it's certainly a market which is not going to go away anytime soon, which is in some ways unfortunate because of the client group we do have, but it's just a sign of the times, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us today, Kevin.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Christy.
Okay, so our first guest there was Andy Bedwell, and he talked about moving to the HMO strategy to allow him to escape that corporate life. And what did you pick up as some of the key points that Andy talked about there, Kevin?
Well, we finished the last debrief of Kevin talking about time, one strategy being slow, one strategy being quick. And with Andy, he wanted to get out of the corporate life. So he needed an accelerated model. So the buy-to-let model just would have taken too long. So the other thing Andy did was he got the support of a community in a franchise, which was unique and it's good for him and it served him well. And if I remember rightly, he's built 9 properties. And, you can do your own maths and your own estimate of what that would be, but it's a significant sum every month. But what I liked about Andy is the way that he's changed the sort of view of the professional market in building a community, within his own numbers of rooms, connecting one person to another, and seeing how by giving people enriched experience, so seeing you're not just a provider of rooms, you're a provider of an experience, then you've got a real opportunity to make this work and have more people actually elegantly refer somebody else whenever you build another HMO and you've got a spare room. And the other thing which I liked about Andy's presentation there, as brief as we've got it, but so many lessons to learn, is once he'd built his number of HMOs, he applied the very logic that he'd learned in that business and applied it to another business, which is applying a multi-let theory, which is a kind of an HMO concept, to commercial property and creating multi-let spaces for small businesses to operate as opposed to renting commercial property to a single tenant. So he's logically applied his intellect and accelerated and done something different, which gives him more diversification in his wealth building. So Andy's a brilliant example of how to do this well.
And then it was really interesting to hear from Chris how he pivoted from the student market to the professional market. And he talked about the product being the same, but the service being quite different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know Chris very well, and Chris is a sort of fairly understated guy, and you might not really pick up his brilliance from, he's quite a low-key gentleman, but if you meet him and you see what he's capable of doing with space, it's absolutely incredible. So he gets massive ROIs on his properties, but he sees it as a business, by referring to it as a product. You heard him say that. Then, you can see he feels like this is a business opportunity. It's not a hobby. So Chris is absolutely in business. And the good thing about that is if you were an investor, if you were a part-time hobbyist, and you went into student accommodation, and then that, for whatever reason, I know we didn't go into the reasons, but if that didn't work for him, rather than oh no, woe is me, let's get out of the property market, he said he pivoted, so that was a deliberate and a conscientious change to focus on something else, building on experience and learning and moving on to something else, which is then takes him to a higher level. And he did so without moaning and without bemoaning where he's been. He's just saying, hey, this works better for me, let's do that. And this is the other thing that you have to do is, that links to Kevin's again, be creative, learn what works for you, and then change what doesn't work for you and learn something new and adapt to that. Because you're always learning, you're evolving and moving to bigger and better things. And that's the same with Andy and the same with Chris.
And another learning that Chris shared is that if there was one thing he would change looking back, it would be to start growing that team earlier to be able to scale faster.
Well, exactly right. And also I'll reflect back, he said, the key thing is the word experience, which, if you link that to Andy's word community, it's back to giving people that are in, as your tenants, as clients or housemates, however you describe them. It's probably good to have a language that you use for that. Then, you can demonstrate that to the people who occupy the property, that it isn't just something, that they feel they live in, they feel part of. And if they feel part of something, they're going to look after the property better too.
And team was mentioned again by Kevin, again, treating it as a business with a team that can staff the properties 24/7. And what were the key points you picked up on, Kevin, who's looking at the supported living sector?
Well, look, this is a niche, isn't it? And it's great to have Kevin on because, he's gone through various iterations in property, but he didn't necessarily describe those. But like the others, he's been changing the face of how he's done that and trying to find the solution that for him is a perfect combination of both a business and something to be proud of and giving back to the community. And while it can't be easy to create a sort of a care environment with all the necessary compliance and rules around that, nonetheless, it's just an example of somebody discovering a niche that works for them. And I can attest to the numbers being very profitable, but that profit is not a bad thing because it enables them to do even better to support even more people. So you have to be a certain type of a person to want to get into that, but then we're all have our own niches, don't we? We all do what we want to do, and we have our own way of seeing that the property is giving something back. It's not just simply a business or simply a set of rooms. And I think that's when it works outstandingly well, when the people see it as a business and see it as an experience, however they're serving, and they see it as that level of service rather than tenants are a pain in the rear. They see their tenants as a really strong connection between them and what they're trying to do and who they're trying to serve. And I think these are all great examples.
Yeah, and Kevin certainly is serving the community and building that reputation, as you mentioned, with the local authorities, with the police and with crisis as well. So doing tremendous work, all three of our guests there. So Kevin, to summarise on the HMO strategy, before we perhaps move on next week to a different strategy, and perhaps we will look at service accommodation, which is a shorter term letting strategy, isn't it, than HMOs, which tend to be really, homes for people that are unconnected under one roof.
Yeah, that's a different strategy. So more of that, I guess, then next week. In summary, you've got to think through, is this definitely a strategy worth looking at? Work out your pros, work out your cons, understand the law, understand the tax position, understand that nobody actually mentioned it, but generally speaking, with HMOs, you're, as the owner of the property, you're making an experience. So that experience is you tend to end up paying the bills. But I've seen some wonderful uses of technology to help manage those bills with, automatic thermostats and all sorts of different things and keys and all, so you've got to learn the technology, you've got to learn the language, you've got to learn the tax position. And just as importantly, work out how many of that strategy will it take you to get to independence, so that you don't get caught up with, I need to manage the property. If you need, let's say, Andy, it was 9. If you need 9, by the time you get to 9, you're no longer managing those on your own, unless you choose to. And then you've got a team behind you. You can delegate that out. And certainly that's what we find, that when you know what your strategy is, you know exactly when you're at the point when you can afford to delegate that. So it becomes more hands-off, not passive, but more hands-off later. It never is at the beginning, because if you try and delegate everything from the beginning, you won't really understand when it's going wrong.
That's a great summary for today, Kevin. So we will be moving on to another strategy within the property pillar next week. And it'd be great to get feedback from those of you that are listening today. If you've got some experiences with HMOs, if you have any questions, then definitely head on over to the WealthBuilders Facebook community. Just search for WealthBuilders in Facebook and join the group if you're not already a member. And it'd be great to see you there. And of course, we always are so grateful for the reviews that we keep getting on iTunes and different podcasting platforms. So if you're enjoying what you're listening to, then please do take a couple of minutes and pop a review. We really, really would appreciate that, wouldn't we, Kevin?
We definitely would. So look forward to seeing you next time, Chris.
Thanks, Kevin.
See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the WealthBuilders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.